After I did my first video on the wisdom of Odin, I expected a bit of pushback from his community. What I didn't expect was a cult-like immediate denouncement of the video before it even went up by people that, according to my contacts in his server, are considered leaders in his community. Given that none of these people are my patrons, and I didn't start getting the comments until after I announced the video on Twitter, I doubt they had seen it. In fact, several of them accused me of saying things I didn't say. Either way, I expected that video to be all I had to say on the topic. Apparently, I was wrong. My comments and inbox filled with requests from patrons, fans, and former server members to cover the cult-like mentality and dangerous practices that WoW promotes. So I took a few weeks to parse through the flood of screenshots, testimony, PDF files, and other items sent to me to make the case. What I saw left me enraged, and y'all know what that means. Is the Wisdom of Odin a dangerous cult leader? Let's do this. Karate. Normally, this is the portion of the video where I'd thank folks who supported the channel, but given the lashback this one is likely to get, I'm gonna postpone that until next week's vid when we'll return to your regularly scheduled educational Hellenist content, thank all the gods. For now though, there be tea to spill, and spill it shall. The first thing I want to draw attention to is the consistent discouragement of outside sources of info aside from the education and fellowship provided by the WoW and his so-called fellowship leaders. We'll get to them in a moment. On both the channel and in his pay-to-play Discord server. Now, in fairness, he'll say, "Don't make me your only source of information," but in shots like this one, he also clearly states that his movement is, quote, doing something different, and until the hall is built, he's not interested in allying with any other heathen groups. This wouldn't be as big of a red flag if it weren't for the strange and culty way that his Discord server is built. He has a modded administrative team that also functions as regional leaders for the various cells of folks from all over the globe in his server. They also lead gatherings and help organize them, and he calls them an extension of the Wisdom of Odin as a channel, but also an extension of himself. Yikes. This line in particular is a little concerning for reasons we're about to get into. I have added their knowledge base so that you can reach out to people that have my approval as being good sources of information to call on. On the surface, that sounds fine, but the lines get rather blurry when your server staff are also your event organizers and are also supposed to be leaders of entire regions worth of people. When you dig a little deeper, he states that these folks are also specifically people he knows in person, and that to become a fellowship leader, he has to have met you at a gathering. Only appointed through his blessing is another bit of concerning language here. If you don't want to come off as a cult leader, why is it that you're emphasizing this when people are clearly in a server that you run? Doesn't make a lot of sense. He finishes this post by calling the Discord server a sacred space, and stating that people who want to be these leaders will function as an extension of the Wisdom of Odin. Okay, you might say, he wants to be responsible with his leadership because of the size of his platform. Good on him, right? Well, maybe not. If you missed my video on the problems with safety at his gatherings, link is in the iCard above to catch up. I'm gonna dig a bit deeper here into testimony I received from an ex-member of his server and a friend of one of those members who went to a gathering. This person has asked to remain anonymous for safety concerns, and though I know this might make the testimony seem less convincing to dedicated members of WoW's following, the safety of those who have agreed to help me dig into his weirdness takes priority over convincing diehard skeptics. As you can see from these shots, this person was a friend of a server member who came along without having to pay. Apparently, the pricing on the gatherings was rather steep, and people seemed very concerned about whether or not they had paid to get in. This person met Wu and got some weird vibes off of him, but I'm far less concerned with that than what happened next. Chris, who in the Discord goes by Drengir of Tyr and functions as one of the aforementioned fellowship leaders, invited this person to do quote-unquote healing work through neo-shamanic techniques. He apparently gave this person a sip of something he called trance tea without disclosing what was in it. Red flag number 1. It's also pretty clear he didn't disclose what this healing work was to the attendee before doing it, because what he initiated is called shadow work. Basically, incense, trance, and drum work, all while the client is encouraged to go through traumatic events in childhood and reconciled with their hurt inner child, as the attendee put it. This person has severe PTSD and DID, or dissociative identity disorder, and had both triggered hard by over an hour of this so-called healing work. They said they couldn't stop crying and could barely walk at the end, but Chris took them out of the tent and proclaimed them a new person. The kicker is that Chris knew of their DID and still claimed that his process had cured them of it at the end, calling them one. Thankfully, the friends that had brought them to the gathering helped bring them down from it, and after, there was an incident apparently involving Wu just doing a blood oath when someone mentioned it, which I won't get into right now, but let's dig into this a bit. Hi, for those of you who don't know, I'm Native American. I have Haida ancestry and was taught some world walking techniques by my great-grandmom, great-aunt, grandmom, and aunt growing up. Even as a kid, one of the first things I learned was that consent was key. Consent here means informed consent. This means the person receiving the healing work needs to be fully informed on exactly what is going to happen and fully consent to every aspect of it. It also means, as an adult, that if someone has a traumatic disorder, this sort of work cannot be done outside of a clinical setting with specialists on call to help take care of the person if symptoms are triggered. For legal reasons, I have to say allegedly, but I'm going to state here that I fully believe the victim, as they had nothing to gain from sharing the story with me anonymously other than maybe closure. What Chris allegedly did here is irresponsible and dangerous. He knew about this person's DID and chose to drag them into a compromising situation regardless, and while they were too weak to argue, proclaimed them cured to an audience. Gods forbid the person had allowed him to do this so-called healing work alone. This is one of the people that Wu has empowered as an extension of himself? It's fair to hold him responsible for this occurring at a gathering bearing his name, given that he has proclaimed these people as those he approves as having trustworthy knowledge and trusts them with responsibility of running these gatherings. These are his trusted lieutenants. By the way, while we're on the subject of BS neo-shamanic garbage, in this recent video on his channel entitled North American Paganism, Wu made the claim that Native Americans are part of the North American pagan story. Yeah, I'll let him tell you in his own words.
So one aspect that is very hard to talk about is the Native American connection to the land. So obviously the land here was watched over and cared for thousands of years by the Native American tribes. And we have to own up to the fact that the American culture and society cannibalized what they did, kicked them out, stole their land, and killed their people. And so again, that leaves us in a very strange spot, because I want to come here and hail this river, and I want to go into these mountains and call to these ancient spirits, but these might be the same ancient spirits that Native American tribes call to. If there's one thing that I think that Native American, traditional religion can follow with Norse paganism or paganism in general, is that we venerate the land. I really want to nurture that connection, and I've been trying to reach out to Native American tribes. I mean, shoot, we have people with Native American descent within our community that worship the Norse gods. So it's definitely a pathway that I want to follow, because it is part of our story as North American pagans.
As a Native American, unless a native is part of a modern pagan religion, your story is separate from ours. We may revere some of the same spirits, but those spirits belong to themselves. They can interact with whomever they choose by whatever means they choose. Though others may feel differently, and I'm not claiming to speak for all natives, I personally feel that reaching out to tribes just for spirituality is appropriative and disrespectful. There's a reason many tribes closed off the ability for non-natives to learn, and a lot of it has to do with people like Wu profiting off of our traditions, be it incorporating bastardized versions of them into gatherings like Chris allegedly did, or teaching about them without a license from the tribe. This brings us to the library of knowledge their server currently offers. A contact downloaded the entire thing and uploaded it to a drive for me to dig through, and there's some seriously like stuff in the shamanism folder. Everything from making hallucinogens to the use of magic mushrooms of various kinds. Given there are at least some people under 21 in the server, and according to at least one post by Wu, Chris was under 19 when he went to his first gathering, having this information just openly accessible in a Google Drive is a patent endorsement of drug use. Why allow your trusted leadership to upload books and small PDFs on how to use drugs for so-called spiritual enlightenment otherwise? What little I've done was done in tiny doses under the guidance of an experienced teacher, and a lot of what I was taught was how to not need to rely on those drugs for trance and travel experiences. Distributing this information openly in a server with many people under 21 is irresponsible and dangerous. Which brings me to the bit I skipped over earlier about blood oaths. Apparently, one happened at the gathering without any sort of trigger warning for those who self-harm, which itself is a whole bag of worms on top of the PTSD triggered by the shadow work done by Chris. I don't feel qualified to talk about the role of blood oaths and offerings in heathenry as a Hellenist. Fortunately, my buddy Wolf the Red did a video recently on blood offerings in heathenry and how they're not exactly the best idea for historical reasons. So I thought, who better to talk about some of the dangers associated with just doing a blood offering at a gathering when someone requests one. Take it away, Wolf.
Thanks, Allie. Alright. First off, what is being done at these gatherings is wrong. And while I do mean morally, I also mean in terms of pagan practice as well. While the moral stuff should be more obvious, the practice question is a little less so I'll get into that. Fundamentally, the things these folks are doing are not offerings or sacrifices. In a pagan religious ritual context, sacrifice and offering mean the same thing. I did a full video on it that covers the topic completely, but in short, unless you're giving something up, it's not seen as an offering or sacrifice. This is blood they're attempting to sacrifice, human blood, but bleeding a little bit is not really losing anything. You've replaced the blood. Buying pig's blood is not losing anything, at least nothing special. The life given of the animal is not exactly the thing being offered either. The best way to explain it is that it's the potential lives of any offspring of that animal that you're giving up, because the value of an animal in a farm context comes from that animal making more of itself. So cutting your hand a little, or even so much that you end up at the hospital lying about how you got hurt to protect the group, is also not a sacrifice. Beyond this, we really should consider that it is as though human blood is tainted, and not pure in any way. The gods generally want us to be clean in ritual to them. Cutting yourself in ritual is seen as unclean, even blasphemous, in the eyes of the gods, and they would likely reject anything you offer in that context. Now to move on to the oath part. Oaths are sacred, not to be taken lightly at all. It's another subject I've done a video on, explaining them in depth. The Norse, being mostly illiterate, saw oaths as legally binding contracts that they were beholden to by their peers and the gods. Your worth was your word, and if for any reason you broke your oath, you became worthless in the eyes of your tribe and the gods. Historically, oaths were generally reserved for things that had already happened. Usually, people wouldn't make oaths to do something in the future. But from what I've seen and heard from these gatherings, blood oaths are irresponsible, historically inaccurate, and cult-like. Not only are you desecrating your sacred space with your non-sacrifice, you're carelessly tying your essence to strangers with empty words, swearing fealty to people you barely know and are meeting for the first time. To some guy who is okay with racists hanging in his spaces and has a history with being against the LGBT+ community. I don't know. Couldn't be me. And cutting on yourself or being cut on, like, historically, your lord gave you a gift for your fealty. You got a ring out of it at least. You certainly weren't the one left giving stuff. The real questions are, at what point do you realize he isn't going to fulfill his oath to build the hall? If he's using all his Patreon money to live on, then it's not being put away for the hall. What do you do about your oath to him? Do you follow him anyway, despite knowing it's a pipe dream? And how do you feel about letting a failed used car salesman cut you for an adminship position in his Discord server that places you in shackles, removing your ability to speak with your own voice while not being paid, while he rakes in fat stacks of cash from heathens desperate for connection and community? Something to think about. Until then, go big or go home.
Thanks, Wolf. If you missed his video on oaths and heathenry, link is in the iCard above. Blood oaths aren't the only potentially dangerous blood-related activity going on at these gatherings. According to his most recent episode of the Folk podcast, bleh, which is on chronicling, and we'll get to the weirdness around that in a moment, homemade so-called stick-and-poke tattoos were given out at the latest gathering, including to Wu himself. For those of you who don't know, stick-and-poke tattoos are basically how prison tattoos happen. A hopefully sterilized sewing needle covered in India ink is stuck fractions of an inch below the skin, and the tattoo is applied poke by a tiny poke. There are far less safe methods, including some folks who use ballpoint pen ink, which I'm going to pray to the Teoe the person applying the tats at the gathering wasn't using, but I'm going to give the benefit of the doubt and assume the person was using India ink and a decent needle. We get no indication that the person was a trained tattoo artist or that the needles were sterilized or changed between clients. Even if the person thought they were sterilizing them, multiple articles have pointed out that alcohol doesn't always fully sterilized needles, and that heating them enough to properly sterilize a sewing needle will often result in the needle warping or becoming otherwise unusable. That, and in a gathering setting, getting help in the case of a potential allergic reaction would be significantly more difficult. We have no clue if he had actual medical staff on hand the way that most professional retreats do. There are so many variables. Plus, most of the time, a staph infection or a hep C can take days or even weeks to show itself, and carries with it both the risk of sepsis or invasion into the lymph nodes. In other words, dangerous and irresponsible. Finishing up my points on reckless endangerment, I also received concerning screenshots from people about Wu asking his quote-unquote folk to go out into the hurricane to get stock footage and pictures for him because he didn't want to buy stock footage and have the original creators not know what it was for? Since when does a stock footage creator who uploads it to a site where anyone can buy it for anything care about what it's used for? I don't even need to explain why this is a problem, do I? Sending your followers out into a fucking hurricane just because you don't feel like paying for stock footage is, say it with me, irresponsible and dangerous. But let's come back to the idea of chronicling their movement, shall we? Because one of my contacts got me a copy of the PDF in the library that this guy made, and not only is it cringy, it smacks hard of hero worship. The interview itself, of course, would lead you to expect this, but boy does the document itself not disappoint. The beginning of the fellowship could be said to have started with one simple sentence. Hi, my name is Jacob, and I'm a Norse pagan. Ignoring the obsessive use of the term folk, which in the heathen community is often a white supremacist dog whistle, and believe me, we'll get to that later too, this reads like an amateur fan blog attempting to create a pseudo-biography. We get a rundown of Jacob's journey starting his channel, then begins a very thin on details account of various gatherings and decisions made about the Discord server and who was involved, including an entire page devoted to my friend Ocean Keltoy, who showed up in the server and asked if anyone was familiar with the typical definition of the term woo-woo, for which he was removed. I guess the dictionary must be offensive to some people? I'm not exactly clear on which rule was broken, but knowing Ocean's usual tact in these situations, I'm pretty sure there's an unwritten one somewhere about questioning anything that Wu likes. I guess cults need an enemy, because apparently a person was promoted to admin just for defending the group against a definition request? I don't understand it. The document ends with another account of someone who apparently went by the term wrecker accusing another admin of misconduct, which the documentarian claims was because of dreams a woman he was interested in had about the admin. Weird how they felt the need to demonize anyone who criticizes leadership, huh? The only mention my contacts could find of my video was Jacob shutting down the discussion of it on the 10th. Jacob clearly endorses the tone and content of the document because he had a whole podcast episode about it featuring the documentarian, meaning he's fine with the level of hero worship and cult-like following despite protesting that he doesn't actually want that power. But if he doesn't, why is it that no one seems to be able to find information on the only group he actually endorses as a worthwhile group outside of his own? I did some digging for this group featured in this screenshot, but I couldn't find any aside from a filing in Vermont as an LLC that curiously appears to be a UPS postal box for rent and has at least 5 other filings by the same person. Guess that group isn't all that interested in public outreach or education. Strange, given that one of his only condemnations of the AFA publicly on his channel was that they were quote-unquote too formal in his video on definitions of various terms around heathenry. However, recently he did a live stream on the 6th and was asked directly about them.
Heathen research. Do I support the AFA? No, I don't. If anyone's actually heard my rants on the AFA, it's really funny. To me, that is a difficult question because ultimately, I'm not near the AFA, nowhere near them, and it is a hot topic in the heathen community. Do I openly support them? Heck no. But at the same time, you know, they mostly keep to themselves, and that's all I can say.
Everything this guy does is calculated. Also, notice the word openly there. Though he said he does not openly support them, he again had an opportunity and didn't condemn them. Why add the word openly here if you don't support them at all? Instead, he weaseled his way around them by calling them a hot topic and stating that all he would say on the topic was that they keep to themselves. Which itself is a lie, by the way. The AFA has a freaking prison outreach program and other proselytizing programs and refer to white people who aren't pagans as folk that are still latent and potential converts. Also, note the ingathering of the folk language in this screenshot from the AFA website, and remember the constant repetition of gathering the folk on his channel. He alludes to a supposed rant about the AFA that I certainly couldn't find on his channel, and my contacts couldn't anywhere on his Discord server. Seems suspicious that if he really had issues with them, he wouldn't take the opportunity to air a few grievances to his rather large audience during this Q&A. Less than 30 seconds of commentary, laden with excuses and weaseling, isn't a condemnation. It's a cop-out. Wouldn't want to lose any of that sweet ethno-nationalist caste, I suppose. Of course he doesn't openly support them, but he certainly didn't condemn them either. In his Discord server, he came the closest to condemning them by saying that tiki torches and racism aren't his idea of the gods, but notice how he still doesn't actually call them wrong and still includes them on a list of Asatru organizations. This is important, because Sword of Tyr, an ex-user from his Discord, actually confronted someone who was a fan of the AFA and alerted the mods that there was a racist in the server. Sword got kicked, but as of the 15th, one of my contacts was able to confirm that the person in these screenshots standing a white supremacist organization is still in the server. So much for the rule that Nazis will be scalped and banned. The last point I want to make regards money and group pressure. Toward the beginning of his channel, he claimed that all of his Patreon money would be going to a hold, or a modern heathen temple on land he would purchase with the saved up allocation from it. About a year later, he made a public announcement that he had quit his job and now Patreon money would be going to pay his bills so he could focus fully on the channel and his so-called movement. As I pointed out on my previous video, his Discord is pay to play only, so if you're not a patron paying a minimum of $5 a month to support him, you lose access to your religious community. And given his rules against splinter groups, and his seeming disdain for other outside groups, these people likely only have this Discord as their religious community. I'd like you to consider the bind that put patrons in who wanted their contributions to be going to the hold. Really think about that. You have a problem that your money is now just going to this guy's bills, but you lose your religious community if you stop paying. I mean, heck, on a Patreon-only live stream that was done on the 18th, he even openly admitted that the majority of his lower tier $5 patrons were just there for the Discord. Here, go ahead, listen to his own words yourself.
And I mean, we have like 445 patrons as of the making of this video, which is just insane. And the majority of them being you in the warrior tier. And I know most of you are probably here for Discord. Great. But also I know there's plenty of you that just support me, that you just want to support me in the work I do. So
this shot came up when a member was scared they'd lose access if they didn't pay. The person was directed to DM Wu privately, and this announcement went up in the next post. We don't know if that person would have been allowed to stay in the Discord or not, because that conversation takes place out of our view. According to my contacts, this was a trans youth just out of a cult getting into college. I ask you, why? If he's so concerned about community building, should only those who pay his bills be allowed to have community? I posed that question at the end of my first video, and I'd like to underline it now. If he's so concerned with starting a movement, why should only those fortunate enough to pay be allowed in? Now, I know you all would expect me to apply these observations to the bite model and give it a score like Telltale would, but I think that regardless of the answer to the question posed at the beginning of this video, the rabbit hole of harm that Wu has perpetuated runs pretty deep. Between himself and his supporters, their reckless endangerment of his fans, his disregard for COVID, the culty vibes of his Discord itself, and his pay-to-play model, Wisdom of Odin is a threat to the heathen community. Please don't harass him or his mods because of this video, because that's a bad look on me and my channel. But if you're supporting him, I'd urge you to really take a look at what you're doing and where your money is going, because this is not a good look. Now, if you're a fan of Wu and you're feeling lost and a little untethered with one of the larger content creators in the heathen space getting called out here, I get that. I've got 3 recommendations for you if you're looking for somewhere to land. Ocean Keltoy and Wolf the Red run a fantastic server for heathens and other pagans to learn and grow together, and Wind in the World Tree is another amazing resource. All 3 of their channels will be linked in the description below, as well as a link to their Discord server if you'd like to talk to some experienced heathens who actually know what they're talking about without having to pay. We're all in this together, and I don't want to see the heathen community suffer anymore. That's why I made this video. Because the outcry after my last one made it clear that somebody needed to speak up, and I hope that others in the community will follow suit and really take a look into what this guy is doing. I don't want to see anybody else get hurt like the person who gave me testimony did, or like people who have lost their jobs and lost their communities because of it have. We're stronger together. Remember that. Thank you so much for sticking through that. If you're new here, chronicle the subscribe button and give the like a dangerous tattoo. Drop down into the comments and let me know if this gives you the same vibes it gave me, or rage the hell out about how jealous I supposedly am of a creator whose existence in no way impacts mine beyond concerns for allies within the community we share if that's your speed. Y'all already did that before my last video even came out, so go off. Special thanks to GaelicNox for the channel art. As always, links are in the description below to their website and Twitter. And special thanks to my patrons. I polled you all on Discord before charging for this video, as I tend to avoid charging for drama content of any kind, but in this case, you wanted to see the depths of the rabbit hole I fell down and felt this was an important muckraking work in the community. For that, I thank you. As I spent hours and hours pouring through the flood of screenshots sent to me by contacts, documents, podcasts, videos, tons of content, looking for information to see if it was a necessary thing. May the cycle of reciprocity between us ever be positive. And remember, faith ain't fear.